All right. Welcome, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Colin Forth, and I'm the host for today's conversation. We're going to talk today about strategy for change, fostering innovation through organizational agility. It is a two-part series, and part two will take place today at 5 p.m. If you have any questions today, share your thoughts with us on Twitter using hashtag WDayChats. My name is Colin Forth, and I am here with Matt Campbell, Managing Director of People and Change at KPMG US.
Yeah, that's me. Hey, Colin.
Hey,
good to meet you.
Good to meet you. I'm glad that we had a little bit of chance in the back to talk about what we're going to talk about today, because we had to cull it down to the stuff that we thought would be best for the audience, because we've got too much good stuff, right,
Yep,
to fit into one conversation. Well, this will probably be high demand, and we'll be back again, I'm sure, after what we...
An encore is always good.
Exactly. So tell us a bit about your role at KPMG and what you do, Matt.
Sure. So I work in our human capital advisory practice and get to work with a really talented group of people from org psych backgrounds, reformed HR people, technologists, all sorts of interesting folks. And primarily the work that I get to do is helping clients work through their people problems. So whether it's thinking about how they're organized, is the work interesting, meaningful, will anybody actually want to do it, and then how do we get the right people actually in to do those jobs.
Okay, and what level of the organization are you working with when you're doing that?
Anywhere across the C-suite, but then we often quite dip down into the organization. So it's really about where the client's at, what their challenge is, and how we actually need to help solve their problem.
Okay, great. So we're going to talk a little bit today about a KPMG study that came out, the KPMG CEO Outlook study. Yep. And just sort of set the framework, we're really going to talk about digital transformation and agility for organizations. And I think the important part about the work you were talking about at the C-suite level is really we're not talking about organizational change within departments. We're talking about cross-departmental efforts for the whole organization today. So one of the stats that came out in that study that I thought was not just interesting but actually kind of surprising is that 71% of CEOs are looking to disrupt their own organization before competition does. That's a huge number.
It's pretty compelling, isn't it? And when you think about C-suites generally, they're usually pretty advanced in their thinking around things. So I think one of the hard parts around that is just because the C-suite wants to go somewhere doesn't mean the whole organization can keep up. So how do you actually create the space in the organization so that we can actually move as fast as the CEO wants us to move?
Yeah, I mean, I'm amazed just that this group of leaders who has spent a lot of time and I mean, I don't know how many books and thought hours have been put into thinking about corporate structure, have structured their organizations and then realize they've got to go restructure them,
right?
Or at least remotivate them in different ways to help them to move faster in an agile workplace that we're in.
Well, and when you think about the pressures that are on organizations these days, everybody's trying to be more customer-centric. We're trying to drive better decisions through data. We're trying to make sure that we've got connections through the organization so information flows fluidly. We're trying to automate things so that as that work goes away, we get the interesting human pieces of work to do rather than the repetitious work. So all of those pieces happening at once is a lot for an organization to actually respond to. And different CEOs in the study in different economies. In the US, we're looking at massive growth expectations from these CEOs. When you look at parts of Asia and parts of Western Europe, that drops off pretty considerably as well. So it's really interesting just how complex the work is. So if you're looking at a multinational level, parts of your business are going to be growing crazy. Other parts are going to be really stifled and maybe even shrinking. So that context around how things are changing
within the same organization.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So talk to me a little bit about how ready are these organizations to actually take on this change?
Yeah. Well, again, C-suite leaders and CEOs in particular, 84% of them think that they have the right culture in place to actually move with a degree of agility. and be able to be responsive and make things happen. We know that that's probably not the case from a whole pile of other statistics, though, where employees feel increasingly fractured. They don't necessarily know how to contribute in an organization, so they kind of get stuck. So I think there's something really interesting in terms of thinking about how do we help people free up what it means to be successful. One of the things that I see happen a lot, especially here in the US market, is there's a lot of time and energy that goes into meetings to make sure that I've got enough permission and enough approval to keep going, or at least fewer people throwing stones at me. So how do we actually free people up to get out of that cycle and actually go and do the job? And that idea around being mission-centered and mission-led in our work sometimes gets lost. So again, C-suites and CEOs in particular think that they have that environment in place. I think that gets lost in the organization. So working out how do we actually free up people so they feel authorized at each of those levels to go and do the job that we've asked them to do is the key piece to
right. I mean, I in reflecting upon work within a corporation, and I am fairly sure that our C-suite here would say the same thing. One of the most important things that they can do is to relate the principles of what we're trying to pivot towards in terms of agility, right?
Right.
It's easy to say, let's make sure that we're agile and we shift in terms of where we're going. It's harder to get everyone coordinated at the same time to move towards that principle and understand it.
Right.
And then the follow-on effect is to give them the authority and power to go act on it without direct permission.
Right.
Which is basically what we're saying in an
Yeah,
organization.
yeah.
So what are some of the components across employee experience, org design, leadership alignment that you think are key for actually, let's assume the 84% of CEOs actually are correct. What did they have to do to get to that point of being ready?
I think the single biggest thing we see is an issue around leadership alignment. So making sure that everybody in that group is actually on the same page, has the same outcomes, and we're all actually working towards the same objectives. And that's hard because everybody comes from different disciplines. Everyone comes with different sets of skills and expertise to bring to a conversation, and we sometimes get a little bit defensive about that. Part of working to get alignment is how do you actually work through what it means to have a common goal, a common purpose that everybody can buy into. A lot of CEOs are very envious of a startup type environment. We were talking about that before,
right.
Where as a startup, everybody's like, we have to make this work. This is going to be incredible. And so everybody focuses on that end objective. That doesn't always happen in big corporations. So how do you find the balance between getting everyone super focused on that alignment around that? And then that's when you start to translate it into your organization design so that we're clear that each group is contributing a particular outcome to meet this broader objective. And we understand the tensions. I think that's the important piece that often gets left behind, is that sometimes HR and finance aren't meant to get along. Sometimes IT teams do need to actually say no to everybody in terms of all the technology they want to put in place. So thinking through what those tensions are in an organization is an important piece of that conversation as well. And very often we get focused on all the good things that are going to happen, and we don't have the difficult conversation around, hey, we've actually got some competing priorities here, and this is where we're going to have some dilemmas that we need to work through and how we actually reconcile those. So I think that goes to then the employee experience.
So with some of that, and you can take that directly down to an employee level, right? So if you sit like I do in a business technology organization, you could say, okay, this is my check and balance. My mission in the organization is this as it relates to the rest of the things that we do. What are some of the best practices that organizations are using now to, is it best to be transparent about those inherent sort of checks and balances? Is it best to be mission focused at the org level?
Yep.
Rather than the whole corporation level? What are some of the leading practices that you've seen out there from successful organizations?
Yeah, it comes down to ticking and tying at every level, right? So that you may be really clear around what your purpose and mission is in the organization today, and then 3 levels up in the organization, guess what? We're going a different direction, guys. So thinking through how do you get those messages across the organization quickly, and how do you as a person actually want to embrace that change? Because you may have planned out your whole summer,
right?
And you know what's going to happen. You know what your work schedule is and how you're going to manage vacation, and all this is going to be great. And then someone changes things that has a direct impact on you. So how do we actually make sure that we understand how you're buying into the mission as well, and that individual buy-in into it, and the willingness to give up the the pride of work that you have, that's sometimes the really hard part that as individuals we have to go through in terms of what you're doing. Maybe that's not the immediate priority anymore, and you've been tipping your soul into it. So, So how do you actually manage that?
That is tough. I mean, here you spend a lot of time building up pride of work and momentum and mission, and then it shifts. Is there anything that you've seen done poorly out there that you would say avoid this practice if you were talking to a CEO behind the scenes?
Yeah, so frequently talking to C-suite leaders is sometimes something they need to slow things down a little bit. Sometimes they actually need to go out and have the personal conversations with people to understand where individuals are actually at. Because again, as humans, that personal affiliation is a really important part of what makes up that experience. And that there's all the good things at an organization level in terms of my career path and how I'm growing, what I'm doing. But at the end of the day, the motivation to actually dig in and change often comes down to those personal relationships, whether it's an immediate manager or other leaders in the organization. So that C-suite, the conversation is frequently like, hey, these are the bits you need to slow down. These are the bits we might want to go a little bit faster on, and reprioritizing what those actually are so that they're really truly focused on being connected to the outside world rather than just achieving their vision. Because again, even CEOs are fallible sometimes, where they get caught on their vision rather than actually responding.
Or realizing that talking to your executive leadership team isn't the same as talking to everybody in the company about what you're doing in terms of the cascade of the message.
And sometimes there's filters, right?
Right. Or even being explicit with your team that you've got to cascade this down, right? What about fear of failure? So I'm an individual in an organization. I've been told that we've just had a big shift in terms of where we want to go in direction, but I was given orders. I have a job description, right? I printed it out. I read it again of what it is that I'm supposed to be doing, and it really has nothing to do with what this new mission is. How do you get someone that has that mindset freed up to actually go do the stuff that you want to do?
Well, again, it comes down to identity, right? So what is your actual identity in this? And a job description, often usually very outdated, but it's still proof that this is what I'm here to do and what I'm here to serve. So job descriptions should always be living, breathing documents, right? But working through what is your purpose, what is your identity in the organization, how do you relate to other things, should be an ongoing conversation. And often we create a job description to hire someone, and then they never actually see it after their first day. And then somewhere later down the path, there's it gets pulled out with, well, here's a job description. And I think the idea of a job description in today's market, in today's organizations, means that it has to be a living, breathing thing, and that needs to be a negotiated piece. So I think if you're bought into your job description, checking that job description is still relevant is probably the first step. So finding who you are in this system is a really important piece for everybody. Being able to actually document it and substantiate it so that you've actually got some evidence is a really important piece. So again, it's one of those iterative conversations that you need to be able to have in organizations. And very often we don't give ourselves enough time to have those conversations. We get so focused on doing things and achieving results that we don't actually care for the other people, the rest of the system, how it all ties together.
Yeah, I guess you have to, for myself, I do get so tied into what we're trying to accomplish that I forget about everything like the job description to go back and it doesn't bother me at all.
Right.
But we do have to probably be understanding that there are all kinds of different types of people in the organization. Some people need the stability and the touchstone again to go back.
But and there's very different styles of engagement, right? Like some people, it is about the details, it is about the documentation. Other people, it's all about the big idea and what crazy thing can I do next. And other people, it's just getting results. Doesn't matter if it's the right thing, I just need to get those results. So working through each of those different needs is a really important piece.
Yeah. What about, so in the excitement to do something, so let's say we pivot on something.
Yep.
What does that mean for, in a startup, I think there's sort of a set culture, right? You know that you are basically engaged to the point where you're giving up a lot of hours that normally would not be sort of on the clock. But when you're in a larger organization, what does it mean to be innovative and to be engaged in this sort of agile shift? Does it mean you basically again go back into startup mode and you're giving up your home life? How does that how does that play? Because if
Yeah.
if really 71% of large corporations
They're
need
gonna
to
disrupt.
be agile, does
Yeah.
that mean everybody's going into a big startup in terms of lifestyle?
I don't think that's realistic somehow. I don't know about you, but
I doubt it would work.
yeah. So I think we talk a lot about the employee deal and what are the trade-offs within that deal. So for some people, they're going to be really excited and want to dig into that work experience, what it means to contributing to a big idea. Other people are going to want to be a sense of stability and where this fits into the rest of their life. So that's going to be different for different individuals. And I think the work that we're doing with organizations, we're seeing them become a lot more bespoke and specific around what is the deal that actually matters to you, and how is that deal different for me, and what does that mean for a third person. And rather than just batch processing everybody, actually getting quite genuine in terms of, well, what are your needs and how do you want to
even on a
contribute?
team level, each manager would basically say, this is what I need on my team, and if I can get a combination of those things across the team members, it doesn't have to be the same deal for every
Right.
person.
And having the explicit conversations is part of that. So a group of my peers, we recently had a meeting, and one of the pretty senior people in the practice said, I just need some permission from you all to not need to be on the clock all the time. And it was something that he needed to say to get out there. But it's a very important thing where, again, a lot of organizations, you don't necessarily have permission to have that type of conversation. So if you're truly going to get to an agile organization, if you're really going to achieve the digital transformation goals that you're trying to drive, people need to actually have enough permission to be able to ask for permission or to be clear around what their needs are.
I love type A people who have to ask permission to do. That's great. I have to get that name so we can get him in my organization. That's my kind of person. So talk to me about technology. How in a large organization, how can you use technology to foster the types of conversation and alignment that require agility? And then when does it hurt sometimes?
Yeah. Let's start on the downside, right? Because it's
Okay.
always easier to pull things apart first. I'm a good consultant like that. Let's diagnose the problem. I think what we were talking about this earlier. Technology becomes a proxy for people to do things or not do things. And if I don't have the tooling, then what does it mean?
Right.
What does it? It's like, oh, I can't do that because I haven't got a collaboration site. It's like, well, did you really need a collaboration site? Maybe a whiteboard is your collaboration site. But when you look at that at scale, it's a question of how do you actually make sure that everybody understands that they need to be having conversations, whether that's on a platform, whether that's in video conferences, whatever form that is. It could still just be in front of a flip chart, right?
Mm-hmm.
But actually having those conversations and making sure that permission is known is the key piece. Where it fails and where technology is when people just become obsessed about the technology, and happens with every digital platform, right? Where we end up becoming slaves to, oh, what's the next thing coming through? So working through the mindfulness of how you're actually using that technology is something we're talking a lot with teams in organizations about as well, is when is the right time to use technology for this conversation? When is the wrong time? And how do you actually shift through different modalities of engagement with people?
Do you ever, not speaking from personal experience, though I am, do you ever find organizations that have so many communication tools that none of them are effective anymore?
Yeah, yep. We actually had a client at KPMG where there was so many communication platforms, and yet there were so many restrictions around all of the content that could or couldn't be shared, and certain things could be in certain places and not. No one could find anything, so everybody would end up using WhatsApp to communicate. So they just went completely outside.
A non-approved, right.
Complete risk profile, like crazy. So what we help them actually think through is how do you create more of that Netflix type environment where, hey, we know who Colin is, we know the sorts of things that he's interested in, the articles that he reads, these are the messages that we need to start delivering so it's more meaningful. So some, yes, are forced through, but others are more bespoke and tailored. So how do you actually make sure that we think about the right type of messaging rather than just, hey, here's everything, and at the same time, nothing, right? So internal portals are notorious for being able to find nothing on.
Right.
So how do you get the right search engine that sits behind it so that when you do want to find something that isn't part of your regular script, it's searchable?
Well, they're always really good for finding outdated policies, though. So
Fantastic.
remember that they've got to be.
Yeah.
They've got to use. So what about? Are there any organization that you looked at where the CEO or C-suite has been particularly effective at communicating to everybody in the organization using technology?
Honestly, any technology is usually reinforced by some very in-person pieces. So again, it's multiple modes of engagement and not just relying on one tool set. Sometimes it's like, if you just think about it as an individual, it's really easy for you to just go into an email and just dump things onto an email. And that's going to someone that's had 400 emails come through in the last day, so they're not reading your email at all. But
asynchronous,
you feel good.
Got it out of your plate, send it on to them.
I pushed it usually on a Friday afternoon.
Yes,
pushing
right
it off
before
for
a holiday.
the weekend.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
So thinking about different modes and what are the way that you actually want to engage with somebody. So frequently we're seeing people look at what that means in terms of a journey and what's the different type of messaging that needs to come to you, but also the different ways of engaging with you at different points along that journey. So as you think about how to actually drive messaging, it's like, oh, well, at this point in a digital transformation, we know Colin's probably going to be a little bit anxious about this. He's not going to want to have a difficult conversation. He probably just wants to learn. So here's the video feed content where he can actually go and learn those things. Whereas in other points, it's like, hey, we actually want input and dialogue. So here's a platform where we're actually going to drive messaging around that content. So thinking about where are you at in that journey and looking at that overall change model that you're going through is a really important piece when you tie it back to a digital transformation.
Yeah, I think back to, we had a company meeting recently and our CEO did something that I guess ostensibly would be very simple, but he asked how many people had read a particular book that he had read and was interested in, was disappointed in the number of people who raised their hands and said, hey, I'd really like you to read this because it would be helpful for all of us to be on the same page about how we're thinking. It's an important investment in our future. And I was really pleased with how charged up the entire team was to go take that on because he had asked them personally. I mean, they all, I don't know how many people were in that room, but a few thousand, and who knows how many people were on the digital media, and they all seemed to take it as a personal ask from him to them to go do this and to complete it. And I'm sure that Amazon saw an uptick in their sales of that book that very night, and we probably have a whole bunch of people that got it read within that week. So and that form of communication, it's a pretty simple thing that he did, but it was impactful for our organization. So I can imagine that most CEOs can do the same thing if they can make it feel personal like that.
Yeah, and I think the important piece within that is there's a person. It's not just go read the book. There's a really important context piece.
What we're trying to do.
Hey, I'm a person as the CEO. This is informing my frame of reference in terms of how I see the world, and it'd be great if you have a similar frame of reference. Not necessarily that you have to agree with everything I'm saying, not that we're going to turn this into a method or the way that we have to deal with each other from now on, but I want you to understand the inputs that are shaping my thinking. And people really appreciate being given the opportunity to say, oh, you didn't just come up with this idea overnight, you actually got that input from somewhere else, and so that becomes an important. So it's a great.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like you're in the boardroom and you're being asked to be part of the decision that's being made, which I think is always motivating for the team.
And today's workforce expects to be able to have a conversation about things. You can't. We've gone from the old autocratic leadership styles where now we've moved out of parental guidance to actually partnering with people as adults and actually looking at, well, you might actually have a different point of view on this and you've got different ideas that are coming through. So again, how do you actually create some permission in your organization to have those conversations? And that becomes the big difference in terms of what really will sustain agility in an organization is how much permission is there for people to keep talking rather than just being told to do. And as soon as you turn to doing, it's not a good employee experience. It doesn't create for good cultures. So again, I think one of the first steps in that path is, hey, here's the thinking. How do you want to have a conversation about this?
What about another technology in analytics? Or how are you seeing that being used to help push a consistent view of what the agile pivot is within a company?
Yeah, so again, access to data is more readily available than ever before. A lot of organizations are still trying to reconcile what to do with all that data. But most people will be happy to know there's data behind a story, and that there's something that actually substantiates this rather than it being a whim. So whether that's customer feedback data that's coming in, whether that's employee feedback data that's coming in, looking at what are the trends, what are the anomalies around that, is important in terms of actually understanding how to engage different people in the organization. One of the things that we've been working on is how do you predict the burnout of particular individuals in an organization at various points in a transformation, and where will there be a cohort of people that need extra care, and having the data to inform that becomes a really important piece of that. So there's all sorts of sensory data that we put into algorithms to get to that, but understanding, well, where is Colin in this story? What does it mean? How do we actually make sure that his needs are being cared for, which you can do with data and with the digital footprint that exists around us these days.
So let me ask you: once the transformation starts with the pace that the world seems to be evolving at now, does it ever really stop? I mean, is there ever really a point where you can say we're through this transformation? Because aren't we just on to the next one?
Yeah, there is no end state anymore, right? But I think the important piece or the important ideals around an end state is, again, at that C-suite to give the leadership direction as to this is what we're moving towards, this is why we're moving, and a degree of permission within that says, I don't know every twist and turn that's going to happen along the way, but we do need to actually have a common path that we're moving towards, some common objectives that we're seeking to achieve. We're going to review those. They're going to continue to change. It's going to continue to evolve. But the idea of constant change is definitely with us in today's world, especially because everything's so connected now.
So setting a North Star and saying this is where we're trying to get to. We know that there'll be hills in the way and other things we got to get over.
Yep.
But if we can just keep the vision on where we're trying to go, we'll be okay.
Right.
Okay. What best practices would you put out there for actually engaging employees in this experience as they go through it? Like what would you say you're seeing leading organizations do to make sure that their employees are along with them in this journey, and probably changing some too, right? Because if we had talked about people who might get stuck in their job. Their job description, and you need them to change into somebody who actually is going to be more comfortable with change.
Right.
What are some of the things that companies are doing out there?
So some of the interesting things that are happening is we're actually seeing crowdsourcing of input from employees as to what's broken, what do you want to fix, what are your priorities, and then tying those into, so there's a what's in it for you as we go down this path. So that's become, and technology is a really great enabler for that in terms of capturing those ideas, filtering those ideas, and looking at how we tie those in to the path so that there's something for everyone within it. Obviously, having the ongoing conversations between all the different parts of an organization is a really key piece to this. So again, back to that leadership alignment, it can't just be someone in HR and IT that are going to go and put in Workday. There needs to be a broader conversation around, well, how does this actually happen? And again, understanding and planning for the contingencies that need to happen, because everything has ups and downs, right? So actually thinking through, where is that likely to occur? Where do we have capacity? How are we going to have conversations? So again, navigating an individual's journey through this and looking at what those impacts will be, looking at how as an organization there's going to be conflicts that are going to bear out because we have different objectives, and recognizing what those tension points are going to be is all part of that planning for how to actually move through that change.
Okay, so we talked about the need to be agile. We talked about the communication methods that leadership can use to talk to their team, the feedback from the team on how to be good about it. What about sort of one of the key things that I've noticed in organizations as someone who implements Workday is the importance to have alignment across large organizational structures, meaning how do you get IT to care about HR's goals, and how do you get finance to care about HR's goals, and how do you get HR to care about the other goals, because people often get blinded by the area that they're in and unaligned to the overall company objectives of what we're trying to do, and fitting into those objectives rather than locking in on their own KPIs that they want to go accomplish. What are some of the things that you've seen good companies do to break down the walls of departments that exist?
Yeah. One transformation I was involved in, one of the simplest things that they did was a red team, blue team idea. So rather than being from HR, rather than being from IT, there was blended teams, and there was a team that was there to pull apart why everything was going to go wrong, and the other team was there to say why everything was good. And so just the mixing of points of view meant that there was some very active conversation, as you would appreciate, and also some breaking down of barriers between individuals within that. So it's an oldie but a goodie in terms of how do you get red team, blue teams that aren't from a function. But
probably got some good dynamics in that room about what was working well in different departments.
And people from different levels in the organization as well. Not everything, just because you're at a certain level in the organization doesn't mean you suddenly know everything. So having people from different levels in the organization as part of that process was really key for that client. So I think that's one of the best ones that I've seen in terms of acting as that steering entity almost in terms of getting that alignment.
And then did you notice that those teams that were built and had sort of built up allegiances together stayed together after that was done?
Yeah, it changed the nature of relationships, because we did some culture impact work at the front of it, because part of this was how do we improve the culture, how do we improve the employee experience, and so then the back end of it was really looking at did that actually move, and the people who'd been most heavily involved in the transformation, much higher levels of satisfaction, much higher levels of engagement, willingness to do things differently.
Yeah, I was. You and I were reflecting in the green room about sort of the early days of Workday and the cloud, and the connections that all of the Workday partners had, because the community was smaller, and so we all had to rely, no matter what company you're in, you had to rely on each other, and the level of connection that created longer term, because you and I have a mutual friend out there who worked in both of our organizations, and as organizations grow, there just becomes alignment by different places rather than the goals. And so it probably is really important to be very thoughtful about breaking down those departmental alignments intentionally, rather than just have it happen by happenstance.
Well, and again, that sense of who are you and how are you contributing to this? So what's your identity in contributing to this? And it's very easy to go, I'm Matt, I'm from finance, this is what I'm here to do. It's like, put aside the finance label, what are you actually here to do? And talk about, I'm there to deal with the fiduciary responsibilities of an organization, what that actually means. So again, talking about what the purpose of being there is, rather than just the label. And as humans, we get a little bit lazy sometimes, right? It's easy to put a label on something and go, oh, you're the IT guy, you're the HR person, rather than actually working through what does.
Absolutely right. I've got one of my leaders and accidental mentors. He probably doesn't know it, but has been a great mentor for me. Was really good at always pulling us back in the room and saying, wait a minute, what are we here for? And whatever you would respond that was related to your department or function, you would say, no, that's not what we're here for. Workday's here to serve the customers. The customer is served through the service. Now what are you here for? And you'd have to recalibrate all the time about, okay, my entire department is here to serve this other goal. I'm not here to be the big shot on campus. And although it's humbling at times, it is also really good for being realigned to the mission of what you're trying to accomplish, and you can be part of something that's bigger. So I think even the intentional, I don't want to say smack upside the head, but reminder
it's a
of what
reinforcement,
we're all doing.
right?
That's like a nice way of saying it.
It's like that we're all actually here to achieve something together. Let's not get hung up on our differences. Let's talk about what we've got in common and focus on how we actually work together to deliver that commonality, right? And I think, again, that's not something that we necessarily spend a lot of time on, or we'll give someone a job and it's their job to tell us why we're all aligned, rather than actually, again, having that sense of, oh, I'm Matt, I'm here today to contribute in this way, and this is my point of view on these things, and these are my concerns, and this is where I think there's going to be problems, and this is what I think the upside is, but having that rounded conversation. and understanding how Matt wants to communicate and why Matt thinks something's important is part of that.
Right, and then actually being open to the feedback that brings, right? That
Right.
there is an expert in the room that is in that particular area that brings it back. What other numbers struck you, if any, from the Outlook study?
Yeah, well, I think 40-something% of CEOs, 42% of CEOs said that they needed to reskill and retrain more than 50% of their workforce in the next 3 years.
All right, so let me get this straight. 84% said they're ready for this change.
Yep.
Culturally.
Yep.
But almost half think they have to reskill a chunk of their workforce to do it.
Right.
Those seem to be cognitively dissident.
Right.
Okay.
And so again, like any survey, right, you're going to get
Right.
some inconsistencies in terms of how it comes out. But I think it's really interesting to think about, well, how do I actually plan for what that workforce is going to be in 3 years' time? Because of the rate that technology comes through and keeps changing things, how do I know where to retrain, reskill? And so that idea that, again, when we talk to you as an individual going through a transformation, what are the skills you need to acquire rather than what's the job that you have? And so a lot of that thinking that sits around how do we start training people for skills and contribution rather than jobs and titling becomes an important part of that story as well. But it's just one of those statistics that for me was like, wow, we've got 40-something% of CEOs, they need more than 50% of their workforce to be reskilled.
That's an incredible set of transformation.
Right.
Right.
And it's easy in some respects to say, oh, we're going to put in technology because there's clear markers around we actually went live, we actually turned on the functionality. It's much harder to say, oh, we actually taught Matt something new,
Did it do something
and he's
for
able
us?
to use it,
Right.
and we're actually getting return on that. So I think that's a really interesting piece, is how do you actually get future ready and think about what those skills are, what your business is going to be, so that you've got the right workforce.
Right. I mean, it really explains the shift, I think, in a lot of organizations towards talking about open mindset and closed mindset. Right.
Right.
Like how to make sure that we are directly addressing the fact that people have to be ready for change.
Yep.
So if you're getting ready for the future, what would you advise CEOs to do?
Don't just start retraining people. I think people, and again at that C-suite, there's a really interesting conversation that's happening at the moment, which is, yes, we're going to bring in technology and it's going to do great things and we're going to move into different markets, and jumping quickly to, oh, we need to send everybody to this particular course or to go and learn this particular type of program. It's like, step back. How will the impact of those things actually change the nature of your business? Is it going to change your business model? Is it going to change how you actually work with each other? Is it going to change the locations, the types of groups that interact? Will people suddenly be interacting with customers where they didn't before? So really understanding what's the impact and the nature of those changes that are going to happen in your organization, and then looking at how you actually go and skill people up. The safe bet is the human skills. So how do we actually do better as humans in terms of empathy? How do we think about what it means to have permission to fail, and actually learn to fail? Because most of us learn to get everything right. So how do you actually create in people a resonance to be able to work in different ways?
I feel incredibly talented in the area of learning to fail. So
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
You're set up for your future ready.
I'm ready for the future.
Yeah.
I think that's a great mindset that each employee in the company needs to feel comfortable that leadership is also comfortable with that, right?
Right.
You've got to strike out sometimes in a big way, swinging, but you've got to know that your leadership has got you. When it comes, how do leaders convey that? Do they just come out directly and say, "Listen, we're gonna go to do something ambitious, and so we're probably going to fail sometimes."
Well, if I look at some work that we've been doing on the future of finance as a function, there's a big idea within that that's around what we call innovate to invest. And so rather than finance coming from a record-keeping accounting background and even planning, that we actually turn finance into venture capitalists that are like, this is where we should place the bets. And so that then is a space where you have to get really comfortable or uncomfortable with how do we actually decide whether this is a good risk or not a good risk. And I think you can take that learning and apply it across other parts of the organization in terms of this is places to learn where there's lower risk and we can make mistakes and it's okay. This is places where there's higher risk. And what we tend to do in organizations is treat everything as a cataclysmic high risk,
Right.
rather than actually looking at, well, what are the different types of
Acceptable
risks?
losses, right?
Yeah. And thinking through that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I definitely have seen in the last 10 years a shift from transactional accounting that was lowering regulatory risk being the most important thing to sort of FP&A and M&A being the emphasis on where the value is seen from the finance organization, right?
Right.
I think we've all gotten better at regulation.
Yep.
And at addressing the needs, and you can see there were a bunch of big shifts in the financial space that forced us to get better at it.
Right.
A number of years ago, and now it's really about what is the outlook for the future and where are we going.
And again, that comes back to what we were talking about before in terms of understanding the inherent tensions between different stakeholder groups. So management teams and shareholders may have very different interests to regulators and customers. And there's necessary tension within that, right? So as an organization, we've got obligations to all of those groups. How are we actually going to manage those trade-offs? And once you start to skew one way or the other, that's where you're probably actually going to start at some point having a big flip back,
Right.
Where you actually aren't actually achieving those results anymore.
It all is a big pendulum.
Right.
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 I wonder if in 10 years we'll be talking about the importance of bringing stability to organizations.
Probably.
Maybe.
Probably.
Maybe it won't be us, but
Yeah.
okay. So I think we're going to wrap up.
Okay.
Unless there's any other like killer stat that you've got in the back of your head from this study that now I think everybody here will want to go read.
Yeah, well, I think we've got a study from the year before that talks about CEOs not feeling confident that their direct teams are actually going to be able to deliver the change. And I think that's the compelling, scary one.
Well,
So
here's the good news. Now, 84% think they're ready to go, though.
right.
So
we've
maybe
got
in the last
culture for
year,
it, right?
we've done a whole bunch of
Yep.
upskilling already.
Yep. So exciting times ahead either way. And I think, again, the key to this is, as individuals, how are you clear around what your contribution is and how that's going to make a difference in an organization? When you're going through a transformation, how are we considering the different needs and different types of journeys that people are going to be on? What are those tensions? And having permission to have conversation around what those tensions actually are. And again, those personalized messages to actually get you to want to pivot. So when your CEO says, hey, I'm reading this book, why don't you read it too? That becomes a really personal message,
Right.
in terms of how to engage in the conversation.
Well, I really like the idea of a bunch of ideas that you brought out today. So setting your strategy and realizing that being able to communicate it clearly so that your team can set incremental goals to get there, I think is important. The idea of building space for failure into organizations and being explicit about it, and letting people have the autonomy and basically telling them to have the autonomy and the power to go out and to pivot on the things that the organization needs to do as we shift, instead of having to explicitly align everyone, which
Yep.
was sort of the 1950s thought
Right.
process of
and
how
giving
we
them
do
a little
stuff.
bit of space in there to build some trust that you're
Right.
actually going to do that as well. You can't just flip the switch.
Right.
It's like, I need to understand that this might just be a good day that Matt's having, and tomorrow's going to come back and be
come to
bossy
tell you
again.
that, yeah. Exactly. That's a good point. And then assessing if the right skills are there, and then figuring out how to intentionally skill up individuals. So it's not just about taking a particular course. It's really about them understanding why they're doing that, and,
Yep.
and building the mindset of constant change, because next year there's going to be another
Right.
skill that they're going to need. That's fantastic. So I want to thank you for the conversation today.
Yeah, thank
It's
you.
actually
Great to
quite
be here.
enjoyable, and hopefully was enjoyable for anybody who is watching with us. And hopefully you'll be tuning in again. We'll be actually doing some more of this today at 5 p.m. And then at the very least, we'll see you next month at #WDayChats.